I'm Brian Stratton, Director of the Canal Corporation and Chair of the task force. And in just a few minutes, I will ask our members of the task force to again introduce themselves to you. And I believe we have one or two who are joining us on screen, so we'll get that introduction also. Today's meeting is the final meeting pre-report, and as you know, our assignment is to deliver a report to the governor by July 1st. So this is the final public meeting pre-report, but this is not the end of our work. So we want you to know that while this is the final public meeting, we will continue to be here to be able to work with you as this process goes forward. This is a transition point now for the governor to receive the recommendations and the findings of the task force and determine how best to implement that. She will work with the legislature, state, local, federal agencies, and she will develop policy. But we will continue to work with her and with you as we move forward. What you're going to see today is the result of more than two dozen meetings that have taken place by the task force and its subcommittees. If you can put the slide back up of the subcommittees.
I could also note, Mike, I don't think we're screen sharing.
We're not screen sharing.
The outside? Hold on.
Yeah, I'm on the live meeting and I don't see it.
Make sure that we're relevant to everybody who's tuned in to watch.
Yes.
One minute, folks. We're just working through technical difficulties to make sure we can share screen with all of you that are.
Yeah, if you can hear us, I apologize. We're going to pause for just a moment so we can make sure that we properly share our screen and to make sure that everybody who's tuned in virtually can see the information that we are sharing here in Syracuse. And now it looks like we might be on, right?
Yeah.
This is why it's important to think of a location that has technology so we can share this information.
No, this is my.
I've got a note slide in there too, it looks like.
The options there. That's like.
Are we okay now?
I'm not sure if this is the right version. But this, well, we're going to roll with it. So go ahead and talk about
I mentioned before we have 3 subcommittees, and they are described there. If we can rearrange the far right screen, so you can see the public engagement committee. So what you're going to hear today is the result of both the public meetings and the subcommittee meetings that we have held by the task force and their members over the past 10 months. Our first meeting, I believe, was in August of 2022, and the governor signed the legislation on July 1st of 2022 to direct the task force to go forward. We will also hear the recommendations that are being put forward today for both the Oswego River Basin and the Mohawk River Basin. Some are apply to both basins, and there are individual basin recommendations. So we're going to be going over that. We get back up to the screen that has the task force members. And Mike, is it possible to move that to the other side?
Yes.
Okay. And now I'm going to ask the members of our task force to introduce themselves. And Bill, we could start with you and go left to right.
Hi, everyone. I'm Bill Neckerman. I've got a background in floodplain management. I'm a private consultant, but formerly with the state DEC.
I'm Tom Snow with the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation out of Albany. I head up our watershed and flood resiliency programs.
I'm Warren McMurray. I'm a professional engineer. Have been in private practice for about 40 years and am proud to be part of the task force.
Hi, I'm Pete Nichols, Schoharie County Soil and Water Conservation District, here representing the Mohawk River Coalition of Conservation Districts. I'm a fluvial geomorphologist and a fisheries biologist.
I'm Nagapal Ravindra. I'm president of Rock Engineering, a civil structural engineering company in Rochester, New York, and in private practice for more than 40 years.
So Walsh, I'm with New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. I'm the regional director for DC Region 8, and also the emergency response coordinator, professional engineer, and have worked in our Western flood zone.
Sorry.
Anyone else from state agencies?
State agency representatives who are here today. Just stand up and introduce yourselves, please.
Jim Flynn, Director of the Office of Structures from New York State DOT. I'm here for Commissioner Dominguez.
Thank you, Jim.
Hi, Jordan Guerin from the New York State Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Services, here on behalf of Commissioner Bray.
Thank you, Jordan. Nancy.
I'm Nancy Arkwright. I'm a Public Information Officer with New York State DOT.
Ken, why don't you introduce yourself?
I am Ken Kemp. I'm the Resilience Director with New York Power Authority and New York National Corporation.
Jeff Savage and the other Jeff.
Jeff Savage, Eastern Water Management Engineer for New York State Canal Corporation.
And I'm Jeff Welsh, the Western Division Water Management Engineer for the New York State Canal Corporation.
Thank you. Did we get Joe? Did Joe introduce himself?
Me, Joe?
Okay. There's Joe. Yes, Joe.
It's Joe Leatherson, the Public Information Officer for Regions 4 and 6 with New York State DOT.
Thank you. We do have a task force member who I believe is on screen. Is that correct? We will, if you can unmute and introduce yourself, that would be great. We're also joined by our counsel's office, Mike McCarthy and Peter Casper from Albany and from White Plains, respectively. Actually, Peter's in Albany and Mike is in White Plains. So you have the folks there, and we are going to get underway. And now it is my pleasure to introduce to you our Deputy Executive Director of the Canal Corporation, Rebecca Hughes. And Rebecca is going to take us through an outline of our report, and then we will dive in, and then we'll have questions and comments. So, Rebecca, please.
It's a very sensitive clicker. So I lost some formatting too, so forgive if the slides are not perfect. We can always share copies of the slides afterward if anyone would like those. I'm not a subject expert. I don't have the credentials that the task force members do, so I'm just going to communicate a little bit for you that are concerned citizens about what you're experiencing in your home communities, about what you can expect from this report and from today's meeting. So the presentation will take no more than an hour. For those that have attended in the past, we've spent a lot of time talking about the characteristics of each basin, its geography, its hydrology, the history of flooding. Today's presentation skips a lot of that preamble and a lot of that background, but if you have questions about it, when we get to question and answer, please ask anything that's not clear to you. Today's presentation focuses on the recommendations in greater detail that you'll find in the final report. So I'm just the report is due to Governor Hochul no later than July 1st, 2023. It will be at her discretion when she's ready to publish that and potentially have a press announcement. We will keep you abreast of developments there so that you can see the final published report. But I just wanted to tell you a little bit about what's included in that report. And then we can get into some of the key findings that we'll discuss today. At the conclusion, we'll have at least a half hour of official question and answer. Like we did last time, we'll start with questions in the room. We'll go one question in the room, then we'll look at the chat and we'll alternate. We didn't have a lot of chat questions last time, but folks online, please be ready to type those into the chat. Shane, I think there's one chair in the back here. I see someone coming in, so welcome. So we will have plenty of time and no one's hightailing it out. If you want to stop and chat about something that you've experienced personally that maybe you're not, you don't want to raise in the group, we'll hang around. We're here to talk, and we can also share our contact information so that we can connect later. So as the report stands now, it is in a final draft. It's still being reviewed by task force members and by members of the governor's office. It has 6 sections, so I'll just tell you a little bit about those, and then we'll dive into a few of the key sections where I think they'll have the most questions about the content. Section 1 is a description of the legislation itself. It also includes an overview of the water basins, both the Oswego River Basin and the Mohawk River Basin, their geographies, their elevations, their key characteristics, just to familiarize the audience, the reading audience with those distinct regional areas. Again, if you'd like copies of the slides, we're happy to share those with anyone. And we will post the recording of the meeting to our Upstate Flood Mitigation website within about 72 hours after this meeting, so that will be available as well. The legislation specifies that we are to measure the impacts of flooding over the last 5 years on key sectors of the economy. This is where I lost some formatting, but the notes are there in the corner. The segments of the economy that are spelled out in the legislation are agriculture, transportation, land use, public health, insurance, tourism, thank you, recreation, power generation, and infrastructure.
I apologize. May I just stop? I'm trying to get back into PowerPoint. I hope you get your formatting as it should be. Mind if I just put a pause?
Sure.
If I want to, it's reading in the browser, not PowerPoint. I do apologize.
Sure. So I'll just talk about section 2 for a minute while Mike, our IT support, thank you, Mike, for being here, gets that set up. So section 2, am I good to go?
Yes. Should.
It's just catching up. There we go. Thank you. They're
Sorry about that.
easier to read now.
Much better.
So when we talk about the quantified and monetized impacts of flooding on those economic sectors, I think it's really important to note that when our team is evaluating those, they're looking at third-party data sources. So they're looking at FEMA insurance claims and emergency declaration records. So I think this is an important nuance to dwell on for a minute. When you experience prolonged standing water flooding, where maybe your RV is inundated, or maybe your septic system sits in standing water and you've got an impact on your well, unless those things are reported and made an insurance claim, they're not going to show up in a desktop audit, right? And when we talk about federal funds through things like the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the feds are always looking at a benefit cost analysis. So the benefit of an intervention, the benefit that would derive from an investment has to be greater. The ratio has to be greater than 1. So when we look at the impacts during the useful life of, let's say, a new dam structure, if that's $30 million over its intended useful life of 25 years, the flood impact has to be greater than that $30 million in order to make that benefit cost analysis pencil out. That's the way that the federal funds are administered. That does not mean that we're only looking at those documented flood impacts from the desktop audit when we're considering recommendations. We have staff in the field, we've conducted meetings, we hear from elected officials about what their constituents are experiencing. So even if those things are not showing up in a quantified analysis that's directed in the legislation, we've done our best to make sure that they are in fact recognized in the recommendations that we've put forward. So please just bear that in mind when we get to those. If you do not feel like your experience is reflected, we would love to hear from you. The report is not static, it's not finite. There can be iterations and updates to the report. So please know that even when the final report is issued, this isn't over until we've mitigated the impacts of flooding in these basins. So the line of communication remains open. So thank you for letting me ramble a little bit about that piece of the legislation and how it's measured. And you'll find when you read the final report that we also refer back to some of the more significant and costly flood events that have occurred in past decades so that they are recognized in the report and we've got that order of magnitude. I will say something that we found in the Oswego River Basin is that there was not an emergency declaration for flooding in the Oswego River Basin in recallable history. But that's very different from the lived experience there. So I just wanted to make sure that that is kind of reconciled for us when we're talking about the report content. Section 3 is an assessment of Erie Canal operation and flood management. So as many of you know who've been involved in this conversation, the Erie Canal was constructed as a navigable waterway to facilitate the Industrial Revolution. At that time, flood management was never contemplated. So in this effort, we're evaluating Erie Canal operations procedures and our infrastructure to analyze how effective they are and how much capacity they have to actually manage floodwaters or excess flows in each of those basins. So that'll be detailed in the report. Section 4 is an assessment of existing floodplain regulations and policies. So it'll be a briefing on what policies and regulations already exist. Carrying into Section 5, where we recommend adaptive measures. There are some that reflect recommendations to enhance or expand existing policies or to establish new policies or regulations. The adaptive measures section is where we're going to spend most of our time this afternoon, just talking through the recommendations for each basin or those that apply to both basins. And we'll have plenty of time to discuss that at the end. And then lastly, Section 6, next steps. Ms. Doyle and I were talking before the meeting got underway, and she said, who's funding the mitigation? The task force itself is unfunded. At this point, there's not earmarked funding through the legislature or the executive budget for mitigating tactics. So that is the next step that we need to advance the report and the recommendations, build support for legislative action and budgeting to help fund some of those interventions. And as you'll find, there's a really wide range in the recommendations of low-hanging fruit opportunities that are low cost, that are about coordination and communication that could be implemented fairly quickly. There are some around modeling and development of other tools that are kind of intermediate, that are moderate costs, and that could be derived from existing programs. And then there's the long-term interventions that are more costly, more complex, and would require federal support, most likely in that benefit cost analysis. So we'll talk about all of those when Ken gets into recommendations. Click it. Yeah, 1 second. All right, so I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Ken Kemp to talk about the assessment of impacts, which is Section 2 of the report, and then the recommendations, which is Section 5, and then open the floor for questions.
Thank you, Rebecca. This is something new that we've done in Section 2 since the last meeting we've been working on. This is some data that we have, like Rebecca said, this is a desktop audit. This is not delving into, we don't have private insurance information. This is mostly from FEMA and places like that, publicly available information. So like she said, your wells, your septic, that is not included. These are just things that were submitted to FEMA. On the left-hand side, you see public assistance claims that are done by state agencies, the state itself, things like that. On the right-hand side, you can see in the Mohawk Valley, in the last 5 years, there's been 107 individual claims against the National Flood Insurance Program, totaling $12.4 million. That sounds like a huge number to us. In flooding terms, that's really not that big of a number. There haven't been huge floods over the last 5 years. As you can see on the left, public assistance claims, the vast majority of them went to roads and bridges that were claimed in the Mohawk Valley. In the Oswego Basin, similar, the public household claims, there was a total of $7 million under 186 claims. Again, sounds like a big number, but in FEMA world, it's not that big of a number. But if you're impacted, it's a big number. It doesn't matter what the number is. On the left-hand side, you can see the majority of the public assistance funding went to roads and also to recreation in the Oswego Basin. So any questions on, this is just a very, very high overview. This is a 15-page section of the report that delves into what these are. There's also, FEMA uses a system that is the expected annual losses. There's calculations of that, how many, the value of the structures within the counties and the amount within the floodplain and the expected loss per year that FEMA expects to see based on historical data.
And could I ask a question?
Of course.
So public assistance claims you said are from the county.
From the county and mainly from the state. They roll up to the state level. This would be stuff that dishes or someone else would put forth.
And then there's also individual and household program, which sounds perilously similar to the layperson, right? So that's when an individual makes a claim.
Correct.
So maybe does that require an emergency declaration that they would claim against, or
It could be
outside of that?
It's generally outside of that. As Rebecca mentioned, in the Oswego Basin, there has not been a FEMA declared emergency.
Sorry, so looking, if I can tune in specifically to Reach 24, typically, for the 40 years I've been involved, because the flooding there, it floods for longer durations, higher elevations, and you know the whole program, but it's not catastrophic flooding, like homes aren't lost, lives aren't lost, and typically with the Army Corps of Engineers cost to benefit ratio, people don't qualify. So they don't get help at all. Now there's been some little programs. In the future, how can those waterfront property, where can they report to? Even if they're not eligible for a claim, those numbers really do add up. Is there a way they can be counted?
That is one of the things that we're looking at, and the benefit cost analysis for the system itself is something we're not looking at in our recommendations for the adaptive measures. We did not take those into consideration. The costs you're going to see, some of them are going to be big numbers because we don't consider that. We were asked to look at the flooding and the impacts of the flooding and recommend recommendations to eliminate some of that flooding. We looked at the costs themselves. We did not look at the benefits that they would provide. So we have kind of stayed away from that as much as possible. As far as your reporting, we can talk about that, exactly how that would be done. Bill, your specialty, I'm not sure that we can look into that a little bit more, I guess.
Into a little more specific, what kind of reporting?
Reporting of flood damage that does not reach FEMA levels.
Okay, that's difficult. And so what's reported here, the public assistance, the individual households program, those are both dependent on federal disaster declaration. That opens up the FEMA spigot. And every federal disaster declaration includes public assistance. That's for publicly owned property, often roads and bridges, wastewater treatment plants, and so forth. Individual households program is opened up on some disasters, but not all. Depends on the scale of the damage. And the individual grant is usually $6,000 to $8,000. It's capped at $30,000. Beyond that, it's a loan. You mentioned on the previous slide in the Mohawk, the flood insurance claims. And you have to realize that perhaps 25% of flood-prone properties even have flood insurance. So those claims, there's a lot of private damage that is really not reported anywhere.
And that is something we're going to speak to in the report and explain that these numbers are low. We don't believe everything can be captured. It's a desktop study. We can't get into the field. We can't get private insurance claim records. We're not, and people that don't report things or don't have insurance, there really is no reporting of that. So
a lot of it has to do with who in your respective county is responsible for cataloging that information. Like for us in Schoharie County, it's our emergency services division handles all of that. And they even told us during Irene, which was a 500-year flood in all respects, that we underreported the damages. And we included crop damage, we included damage to infrastructure, public, county, local, we included businesses, residential losses, and we were still underreported in the millions of dollars. So it's really important to know who's responsible for that task, what agency within your county, and make sure that you keep every single receipt. Everything's got to be really organized and maintained properly, and there really should be a protocol in place to make sure, because you don't want to miss the boat on a disaster declaration because you were shy by, and I don't know what the threshold is for your county, but there's a threshold that has to be met before an emergency declaration on the federal scale comes into play. But then, like Bill said, it does open up a spigot of money for you folks.
about like contaminated wells and septics from flooding, you know, any, where do you report that to? Does anybody keep track of it? What about, you know, long-term side effects, pregnant women, children, and long-term health effects related to that, and running water
Department of
lines to everybody and sewer systems, to everybody?
That would go
Ever
direct-
examine
that,
that?
that goes directly to the Department of Health. We do not have those records.
Okay, but is that something that got looked into when we did the cost analysis of all this and, you know, and
The damage assessments, this is a tabletop exercise. We don't have that information. That's why we say, we understand that we got to report it. And we do specifically even already have that information in there. Contaminated wells, compromised septic systems, things like that, especially from standing water. They're generally not going to be something that you're going to see in a FEMA declaration.
Okay.
Those are things that go to the Department of Health. It's a kind of a different, it's an interrelated issue, but it tends to get reported differently.
because of.
No, it's
contaminated
unreported.
wells and septics. I mean, New Yorkers now, we have a new right to get clean air, water and everything. That might be something that the state might have to pay for to do that. So I was wondering maybe running water lines to everybody in the area. If
That was looked
potentially
into.
got looked into.
We did start to look into that cost. The costs got very, very high, very, very fast. It's still a consideration definitely. And this, as the task force goes forward, like Rebecca said, this is not a static document. This is meant to be, have other input as we find out other things.
Thank you.
So real quick on that point, knowing that a lot of the number of impacts are smaller and are not going to show up in the data that you're gathering and using, but they're significant to each of the people who have.
Yes.
Is one of the recommendations going to be around some way that the organization you spoke about that should be gathering, the Department of Health? Is there some way in your recommendations to tie the Department of Health to this effort that you're undertaking, right? Because that, a lot of the things that concern us and concern the people that we're trying to represent are more Department of Health issues than they are catastrophic. And a lot of our issues are never going to hit your radar for the things you're trying to accomplish. But if you know there's an organization that should be helping folks like Dan, is there going to be a tie between those organizations in your recommendations? Make sense?
Yeah, I think let's take that as the task force. We still have subcommittee meetings remaining. We're still editing. You know, there's not currently a line in the report that says, you know, an information sharing, anonymized information sharing portal with Department of Health shall be established, but it's something that we can take back and have discussion with those that have worked in this space for a long time and see, you know, is there a way we can paint a more complete picture to capture those impacts?
Right, and this is mainly related to section 2 of the report. The hope is that anything that we do for flood mitigation anywhere is going to reduce the levels of water everywhere so that those impacts.
Yep.
So it, like Rebecca said, we'll take that under and have additional discussions about it. We have at least 2 more meetings next week. So
I think where it becomes important is when you're suggesting a project to reduce flood damages, and the benefit cost analysis has to come into that. So there might be benefits that may be missed because they're not looking at well contamination, for example. So that might be where it comes in.
Exactly, and if you are applying for FEMA funds or any federal funds, that is a big number. The benefit cost analysis, Rebecca said, you look at the benefits, the damage saved over the lifetime of the project divided by the project cost plus the maintenance of that project. It has to come out as a 1. That can be tough to do. I'll talk a little bit more later on about the HMGP, the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program that FEMA does outside of the damages that you see up here. They save roughly 15% from every disaster declaration goes to mitigation programs. So the next time it doesn't happen. We'll get into those a little bit more. Yes, sir.
So what I'm hearing, simplicity is the information that you've got is not enough to cover all of the hurt that we're getting as people that live on the water.
Yes, and
right, and
it's a tabletop exercise. It's publicly available data. We can't we don't have access to a lot of other things.
And if that is the case, then how can we expect an improvement and a change when you are looking at a very small percent of what really happened? Is there some way you could analyze and come up with a methodology to understand that there might be this percentage that should have been there?
I think, Ken, we go on to recommendations and start talking those through. When we look at, I think about things often like levers. What lever can we pull? How big is it? How strong is it? How feasible is it? So when we think about trying to create the greatest good for the greatest number in this really huge basin, if we're looking at things where there's a hydraulic constriction, if we're looking at things where our technology needs to be upgraded or where floodplains can be enhanced or expanded, if we're using those big levers, that will reduce the impact on individual families. So it's not necessarily, an equation where we say how measurable was the problem before and how measurable was the benefit that we were able to impart. But in theory, if we're pulling the big levers, it should also impact those impacts on the individuals. But let's talk through the recommendations and see what resonates. And if you have questions about those, well, we have plenty of time to talk those through.
Okay, so thanks. I understand that, you didn't have the ability to get the fix. Right.
And that's why we excluded cost benefit analysis in our recommendations. If you're going after federal money, the benefit cost analysis is important. If you're going after state funds, they're going to look at the number of people impacted probably, as well as the dollar value. So it's a different methodology for approving projects. And I think the state would have a lower bar as far as benefit cost analysis based on the number of people impacted.
Is it a possibility that you could put out some documentation to the people that here's what you've got to report if you got a problem, and if you don't, they're not going to help us? That's something we should be doing.
I think that's something we should be thinking about as we have a recommendation about communication and education. It's more about preparedness, understanding your rights when you're acquiring a property. But I think there could be an expansion there to say, as citizens who are concerned about our community, how can we make sure that we're going through the right channels to capture the impact? So I think that's a really good point of feedback that we can bring back to the report.
Right, that's one of the recommendations that we'll talk about that we can add to, definitely.
I'm going to say one more thing, though, man. Okay. I'm an engineer. I've been at it for 50 years. And for me to make a decision, if I don't have all the data, I can't do it. And it's not that.
Don't understand.
So push the state, push the company, push the people so we can get good data and we can make a good decision.
Yes, we can do only so much with what we have. It's going to take you guys, all the people in this room on the to push their legislature, to push their legislators to get that word out there that what your impacts really are.
Thank you.
And we spoke about this in the last meeting of the adaptive measures. We're going to go through them in a little bit more detail. They're a little bit farther vetted. They're not complete. They are getting much closer. Folks at these tables have put a lot of time in the last few months trying to get us to this point. So we'll go through the findings before we discuss each one. As we talked about in the last meeting, numerical models don't exist. They're the basis for every decision that's made within a water basin. Right now, the watershed for Mohawk, Tom Snow, his group is working on one, but it's not complete at this point. The Oswego Basin, no one is working on right now, and it is a very difficult system to put together. But that is one of our recommendations, is to develop numerical watershed models. Develop and calibrate. Calibration is making sure that those models match what you actually see on the ground. You can put anything into a computer, like they say, garbage in, garbage out. You have to make sure that what you're putting into the computer matches what exists, and that the data that you get out of it is reasonable. Using an industry software, industry standard software. There are several different industry standards out there. We generally lean towards the Corps of Engineers HEC models, but that's open for discussion. This would enable scenario development and response estimation. What that means is we can model predictive abilities. If a storm with this much comes through and hits this area, what's it going to do downstream? What kind of adjustments the gates have to make, things of that nature. One of the things we're going to talk about later, Baldwinsville Dam. If we modify Baldwinsville Dam, what's the impact? If we use the same model for all of these scenarios, we'll have a good idea of what it will do, what the impacts and what the benefits will be. Utilize available information, LiDAR data, a lot of different things. A lot of counties have different data. Take all the data that they've already collected, use it to put it into our models, make our model more accurate, more meaningful. Complete any place that we have gaps, land and water-based surveys. There's not a whole lot of data on the bathymetric, the underwater features on the canal in the Mohawk and in the Oswego. Update that data to make sure that we have the right flow paths and the right flow areas. Update it on a regular basis. It can't be static. We have to look at it every couple of years and update it to make sure that it meets with current conditions. Climate change is something everyone's talking about. No one really knows what's happening with it, but it has to be able to be updated for changes in 100. The 1% storm changes almost annually anymore. There are constant changes going on. And all of these, what we did at the end was we added potential barriers. These are things that the task force has been discussing of what would stop this from happening. Why should this be implemented? Why can't they implement it right away? You're going to see this a lot. I apologize, but resource availability for funds. Canals, this is an operational expense. Canals does not have the funds available right now to do this immediately. I know DEC doesn't have those funds sitting, waiting to be done. The funds need to come from somewhere. You need to figure out where that comes from. And that's going to be one of the next steps for section 6 of this report. Estimated cost, we're estimating about $700,000 to have a consultant develop a model for each watershed to make it usable, to get all the data collected, to get it into something that all of us can use. And the other goal that's not on here is sharing of this model with all agencies. DEC, Canal Corporation, NICA, DOT, everyone needs to use the same model if we possibly can.
I'm sorry, do you consider the planning, I mean, because zoning, like the Oswego River Basin, very concerned about the impacts of the region for micro, right? So that's all social river basin.
Right.
So land use is going to change significantly over time. And the planning and zoning boards are often the ones that are making those land use decisions. So is that kind of included in who would be using this as a tool once it was developed? Those are the ones that actually make the decisions of the landscape.
I'm not sure that Micron, even the scale of Micron, would be big enough to make a difference in the model because of the drainage area you're talking about.
But would Micron use, like, so where these are only available currently in limited capacity in paper form, more sophisticated calibrated models would result in digital records that more people could access. So is it something that Micron
Different thing. We're talking about models. This is not floodplain analysis. This is not changing the 100-year floodplain or anything like that. That is something that's different, that's done by FEMA. We would share these maps and these models with FEMA so that we could go back and forth. But as far as Micron being the ones to use them, I'm not sure it would be big enough to do that.
Well, I would just say that with projects, say like Micron size for that particular municipality, I'm sure that they would be looking, would want to look at something like that at the municipal level. Whether or not they are, I mean, again, I'm not sure what how they're addressing that at the local level. Obviously, it's
nothing.
Planning process kind of thing. So, but I would agree with Ken that unless you have a lot of microns all along the Oswego Basin, that's probably the individual project itself. Its influence on the overall basin is. I don't know the entire details of Micron. One would expect that they would want to use some information from the local perspective.
Are you concerned about impervious surfaces, stormwater drainage? What's the
Changing elevation, just ongoing. I think land use dictates where water gets to attenuate and where you're able to recharge things. So being able to have, a model that's updated even more than every few years when we're likely to see the strongest development pressures on this region. And you've localized play, right? So like the Oswego Basin is very large, but I'm thinking directly like what's going to go right into the Oswego River. There might be some more localized bases. So I think there's a huge benefit for this model. And I just want to also think about who would be using it. And I just think that the local zoning and planning boards are really important that we have to think about it in addition to state agencies and other local government.
Generally, your impervious area is going to cause runoff much faster to higher volume. So yes, this model, a section of the model could be very important to them and important to the people that live on the river, yes. But as to a basin-wide model, that's probably too big for that, but there could be sections of this model that can take. Yes.
With water managers, for example, in the Finger Lakes, do they have access to it?
That's the goal.
That
You'll see a couple more recommendations coming up that we're going to get a little bit deeper into that.
I think the key thing underlying this model, as far as those of us on the task force are concerned, is that we need some sort of a trusted basis upon which to ask people to make decisions that will change the way they have operated in the past. You know what I mean? I mean, if we're going to make any real change, then we've got to have some data that people trust, that people will say, okay, I see, if I do this a little bit different, it doesn't really hurt me, but it's going to be better for the group as a whole. You follow me? And so this model is so important. It's really the foundation upon which much
Where'd my audio go?
of the other options, I know, and I've heard this for years. All they do is study stuff. It doesn't improve anything. We just study stuff. But the issue here is that if we don't have credible information, if we don't have credible data, then it's very, very hard to convince people to change the way they've done things in the past to make things better in the future. So please understand, this isn't a recommendation just to do more modeling. It's a key part of what we think is necessary if we're all going to make some improvement in the future.
He said it. That's exactly right.
100%. That's why this is the number one recommendation in the entire review.
Behind it, you gotta have data. The only way you're gonna get it is to put it in, a location where you can use it and analyze it. And I'm gonna go back and tell all my people that, hey, support whatever you can do.
That is why this is the number one recommendation, and this is not to be developed by one group. Canal Corporation, even if we provide the funding, this is a collaborative effort with DEC, with FEMA, with the other water release agencies, the hydroelectric plants, to know what they have, what they're capable of releasing, things like that, to make sure that the model is correct. It has to be a collaborative effort.
Yes.
The second finding, every basin is a very intricate, delicate system, interconnected. And water management is done by different groups on their own agendas. Whether it's the Mohawk or whether it's the Oswego Basin, both have that happening. Hydropower producers, municipal entities, even a canal corp, everybody's different. Everybody has different agendas. So that is the big question of how do we get those people to work together? The initial recommendation for both basins is a standing committee for each basin itself. Permanent committees. They include the water control entities, people that control water releases, community stakeholders, groups like yourselves, different groups that are represented here and on the call. Other agencies, DEC, DISHES, Canal Corporation, DOT, what used to be GOZER, other agencies, state, federal agencies, to be part of this discussion so that we can develop flood operating strategies to coordinate the releases so that everybody knows what's coming. Jeff, you guys know we get 6-hour forecasts from agents. They're not real accurate. Everybody knows that. And when you say it's going to rain, to most people, it's going to rain. Okay, that's what they need to know. Whether it's a 1/2 inch or 4 inches is a huge difference to us. and to every water manager out there. So the coordination of those releases and the size of these basins requires that parts of the basin will get a lot of rain. Parts of the basins may not get any. So one place like we just had happen, Canandaigua Lake got 4 inches, 3 to 4 inches of rain. They dumped all of their water. They had to. They didn't tell us it was coming. You know, we need to be able to, you know, it's not their fault. They're trying to save the people on their lake. Understood. But there's no coordination there. Potential barriers we see for this one, no one set up to participate. I have the Finger Lake, I have one of the Finger Lakes. I'm responsible to people on my lake. What do I care about downstream? Why would I participate? Because it could impact the people that I serve. So how do we get around that? Are there incentives to get people there? Is it a state agency? Is it a state mandated board? We're trying to figure that out and we're going to make a recommendation to the board, but it could take a lot of different forms. We're still trying to figure that out, and it may not be a definitive answer in this task force report, but it would be going forward with the task force that something should come out of it.
Ken, if I could jump in, I mean, I think it's clearly low hanging fruit. This doesn't mean that we don't talk to each other. There are really strong relationships between the water management entities, including Canal Corp, hydros, lake associations, but there's not a standing committee with designees who's sharing information maybe through a database or software where they're alerting each other in real time or have situational awareness about what's happening with gates, gauges, releases, flows. And when Ken says that there's no incentive to participate, you know, obviously I think we can bring some folks to the table right off the bat. There's probably in-house development work that would give us leaps and bounds better situational awareness in real time. But there's 2 things to call out in that. First of all, there's a perception that Canal Corp has jurisdiction over the whole watershed. We do not. We're one player amongst multiple, but we are serving in the public's interest. The canal does belong to the people of New York, so we have a vested interest in having a leadership seat at that table with other agencies. And the other piece is that, you know, we've talked about this at each meeting, a water association for a given lake serves their constituents. So whether they come to the table or don't, the priority is going to be to maintain navigation levels that might be to prevent flooding to residents of that lake that employs them. So it is complicated, but I think it's one of the most exciting recommendations because you can experience incremental gains. You don't need to have everyone on board to make an impact or to improve coordination. So I think that's just a little of the nuance to tease out there.
Good points, Rebecca. The other potential barrier for licensed facilities, a number of these hydroelectric plants are licensed to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. They technically don't have to listen to state governments. Having worked 15 or 20 years in that space, there's ways around it. The people at FERC are very aware of flooding issues. And I have talked to some of my friends that work there, and it can be dealt. It's not an insurmountable problem. We just have to come up with a strategy to move it forward. But just a potential barrier to put out there. Estimated cost, it's variable. If we have to give incentives, if hydroelectric plants have to dump water that they can't use for generation, they might have to be incentivized to do it. Or we can get it, you know, if it's really for public benefit, FERC might allow us to do it or to request it without incentives. People taking the time to be part of these groups, I'm sure there would be some kind of compensation. We haven't really decided on what that would be. I say that now, looking back here at the task force members that are all volunteers. So, you know, there are good people out there that will do work for just for the good of the state. Exactly.
For lunch.
Okay. The next finding.
My arms aren't long enough over there.
For both basins, lack of consistent education across the basins. People don't know what they're getting into when they buy a property on the waterfront. People don't understand what the waterfront means to them. It is a great resource, but it comes with its hazards. And a lot of people getting into this, they just buy it because it's on the waterfront. We understand that. And also, personal and community emergency preparedness. It doesn't always happen. Are people prepared? We hear a lot of people moving things out of the floodplain because the water's coming up and things like that. Where is the 100-year floodplain, or where do you expect the water to come every year? Where do we anticipate, or where does FEMA say it will come? You know, the education of what they should be looking for and what they should expect living on that property. And that's what we're looking to do, is come up with educational events, materials to hand out that are your local, your county, your municipality, things like that before people get into buying it, so that they know what the flood hazards are and what their risks are during any given flood event. If someone says that the 2% or the 50-year storm is coming, what's that mean to them? A lot of people don't know that, especially if you just moved in. So this is what we want to do, is get out there and educate the public better on what is coming. We had a discussion before, before people buy houses, real estate agents should be educated on what a flood hazard is, what the floodplain is, so that they don't sell things to people that people don't know about. Big ask, I know, but they also have continuing education requirements. So is that a class for them that they should take?
There was legislation in regards to the disclosures.
I'll let Mr. Knapp take that.
Yeah, actually, last Friday, the Senate passed the bill. The Assembly had already passed it. There was really uncertainty until the very end because they're going out of session. There were two key senators that switched their votes to support it. So now it's up to the governor.
Let's send the governor some letters. Yeah.
That's up to you guys, but yes,
Does that bill require disclosure?
The Real
or
Estate
not?
Disclosure Act
Yeah.
is for properties, is in front of the governor. So we've been talking about it. That is one of our recommendations. Hopefully we can take the recommendation out because it'll be passed. That's our goal, but that is one of the recommendations. So, again, potential barrier, just the availability to break people free to do this. Everybody in the state governments and state agencies wear multiple hats. Getting the time to develop these education materials. We're throwing a cost out there of about $100,000 annually just to get things started, to get some people's time, to get the different groups involved, and get them additional funding, whether it's another person or just somebody else's time. And there's somebody that helps backfill that position or part of their time. Those to accept it. The next finding, additional alerts and notifications of coming events. We've heard this a lot, and we continue to hear it, that what's coming. People don't realize what's happening in different parts of their basin. And like I said, the forecasts are not always right, and these are huge basins that one part of this basin may get a huge amount of water and the other one may be dry, another part may be dry. So just being aware of what's going on and having those notifications come to you. The recommendation is to come up with a coordinated outreach plan so that the people in the basins have better accessibility to these warnings, to these notifications. You're working with National Weather Service, with NOAA, trying to get the word out, working with dishes, DEC, canals, everyone trying to get a plan together so that if we have a flood coming, if we have any idea of what that flood event will be, as far as what level we expect it to reach, or things of that nature, get that information out there so it's easy to find. I know a lot of us, we've done a lot of digging on the internet and we know where these things are. We don't expect the general public to know that. There should be some place that they can go and look and say, am I in danger? And here's the prediction. Yes, sir.
So I'm from the DISHS, as Kent's been calling it, Division of Homeland Security. We have a program through the state called New York Alert, and it can go to your phone via text or email, and it can be customized even down to your zip code for what type of emergency alerts you want. Flooding is one of them. I get alerts to my phone when there are flash flood warnings, when there's at risk of severe thunderstorms that could cause flooding. If you go to alert.ny.gov, you'll be able to sign up for that pretty easily. It's a free service. It texts you right to your phone, or it can send you via email as well. So that's just part of the public facing.
May I ask, Reach 24 is basically never flooding was reported. If residents in that reach, Cross Lake, Seneca River, reach 24, if enough residents call, there might be a little story, but on these alerts, we aren't included.
Yeah, so these are the National Weather Service alerts that come in based out of the regional National Weather Service offices and based off of their forecasts. They will issue watches, they'll issue warnings. That's more preparedness information. So not so much reporting structure after the flood happens.
Bear in mind too that if you have USGS gauges in your basin, you can get text alerts through USGS, and you can actually set the flood elevation heights depending on experiences that you've had, or maybe if Canal Corps can provide information. I can actually customize those text alerts to receive them. Like we have a stream by us, Cobleskill Creek. When it gets to 10 feet elevation, it'll send me an alert automatically. So it's really a nice tool to have. So if you have a gauge upstream of you, it can warn you and your neighbors that this thing's coming. So even without the NOAA alert involvement, you still have your own personalized reach specific alert. Yep.
Good education here actually today. To thank you guys for bringing that up. We'd like to take that to the next step, so it's very easily accessible. So it's part of education.
Yeah, there's a lot of information as well at the local and county level that we are coordinating state agencies with and cooperating. So that based on past experiences, they are number of other counties tie in with state emergency management, DEC, and others to make sure when they see a condition, they're aware of what's going to be incoming shortly after that. So again, like to Ken's point, taking some of the information, putting it together in a way that we're able to make it a little more readily available and some more actionable intelligence, getting that alert. And that's something that's meaningful to that community, to that person. They know what that means when it gets to 10 foot, what kind of actions they should be taking. So enhancing all of that.
Any other questions on this session?
Yeah, I was just wondering if they're going to do anything in Baldwinsville about the bladder dam. Is that a possible thing?
That's coming up. It's one of the recommendations for the hospital itself.
I mean, that would make it so the Canal Corp could control the water.
That's part of the discussion, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Mike, advance us. Yeah. Perfect, thank you. This is one that we talked about at the last meeting. We keep developing this farther, and I know it's near and dear to Tom's heart as well. Bill, everyone in the committee. Historic floodplains are disconnected. Everybody's seeing development into the floodplain. We all do it. We've all seen it. That floodplain is there for a reason. It's historic. It provides temporary water storage. It improves water quality, and it provides habitat. These are things that we really need, especially Reach 24. We've seen it. Any place we can get extra storage, we know there's some places that have been disconnected. Every place, I don't know the river that doesn't have disconnected floodplain. It's modern culture. So what's our recommendation? Provide additional support to state, local entities, NGOs, non-governmental organizations, in their efforts and initiatives to purchase these things, funding, technical support, whatever is needed to restore the areas, provide flood mitigation and water quality improvements. These are huge deals. We're going to talk about structural interventions. This is one that everybody can get behind because this is a natural solution. This is the way it used to be. This is what we would like to go back to as much as possible. Potential barriers, resources to buy the property. Once you buy it, you also want to restore it because chances are if it's disconnected or it's been purchased by someone else, they're using it for a different purpose. How do we get the money available to buy the property itself and then restore it? Those are the two big things that we see. But with the Environmental Bond Act, other things, FEMA has done it. We've seen it happen. We've seen successes. We think those successes should be built on. One of the potential barriers we always hear is the potential tax-based loss. We kind of refute that to a certain degree, because if you provide flood storage, this areas downstream that are protected are more valuable. You've got more public lands. That makes the local property more valuable. It's a local response to that, and I understand in the short term there's generally a small term loss. But what's happened with FEMA and other groups in the past is they do what's a scaled buyback. The first year they pay 100% of the property taxes from prior to the redevelopment. Then the next year they pay 80%, 60%, and they scale it down so that it's not an immediate loss of tax base. It happens over time, and the local community has the time to absorb any loss. Most of the wetlands that we're talking about restoring, or the areas that we're looking at restoring, are not high value property. There's a reason they were in the floodplain in the first place. So that's another argument countered. We're going through the tax bases, and the probable, you don't believe there's really much tax base loss of anything. Estimated costs, widely variable. How much land are you going to buy? Where are you going to buy it? Things like that. What we're recommending, or at least we've discussed recommending, is a base funding program supported by the state of a $2 million a year fund to go out and buy that land. We're trying to see how much acreage that would buy, just an estimate, and we'll see if we have to change that number or not. But that's kind of a ballpark figure that we're throwing out there.
Yeah, I was just going to mention, we modified the water quality improvement program, the WQIP. Hopefully folks maybe are familiar with that. It now includes flood mitigation, climate resiliency work. Floodplain restoration is one of those activities. So we've modified that program. And then obviously, as you mentioned before, the Bond Act, this will be a major programmatic component in the Bond Act as well. So, there's been some changes that have been made. So to help facilitate this type of work, and in areas that need it, like perhaps the Oswego Basin, I'm sure it's nice to have a funding program to line up with some priorities that have been identified.
Anybody have questions on the floodplain restoration? The second recommendation following that same thing is purchasing flood-prone structures within the floodplain. On the left, you can see I used this before. Zach left, but this is what it is from Staten Island. The houses on the left you see were damaged in a hurricane. Second picture down is what they once they removed everything. The third picture is what it looks like now. We don't want to kick. We're not kicking anybody out of the house. This would be buying the house for market value, removing the house from the property, and restoring it to floodplain. We all know that when you build in the floodplain, it impacts the flow of water, how the water moves, your capacity to carry the water, things like that. It changes everything. But what we're looking to do is people that are getting flooded, don't want to be flooded. How do we get them the money to acquire those properties? One of the things is developing a toolkit for municipalities and residents. How do you guys, if you're tired of it, if you want to move out, how do you get to it? Can you make money on it? I don't know. But what program do you use? What's the best program for you to look into? Looking into more grant opportunities. As Tom mentioned, there's a lot of different things out there right now. We're still learning. But I hate to go back to the Environmental Bond Act, but that's one of the things that's been mentioned very heavily. Zach Tierney from Dishes, that's one of the things that they're working on now, is what you need to do to qualify for inclusion in that funding. So there's a lot of things out there we want to let people know and get the information out to those people, and try to get anybody that is interested in selling their property in the floodplain the ability to do so we can go back in and restore. Potential barriers, as always, resource availability of money. It's not as much of a problem in these areas as it used to be. We're seeing a lot more funding, a lot more desire to reacquire these properties because they are going through flooding all the time or on a more common basis. Potential tax base loss, we talked about that on the last one. Third one is a big one. Ensure existing property owners have sufficient incentives to relocate outside the floodplain. You have a waterfront house, you have a waterfront property. What is it? You bought that waterfront property because you liked it. Where can you live that you would get the same benefits or at least the same quality of life that you have now? That's a difficulty. That's always a question. So that's one of the big barriers that we see because people don't want to sell. Understood. There's going to be people that do want to sell. There's people that are going to say, no way, I love my house, I'm staying. So those are issues that we have to work with. Estimated cost, again, we're putting about $2 million annually into this fund, a fund or a program to move this forward, in addition to the Bond Act, the Water Quality Improvement Act, everything else that's already going on. So just to get and make sure that people understand what's out there and how they get to those funds.
Can I would just add too, there's specifically $250 million set aside in the Bond Act for buyout. So that's a good start.
Yeah, it's statewide, but
yes,
there's a lot of properties that could definitely benefit if the owners were interested. Any questions?
Has eminent domain been in the conversation at all?
No. The legislation specifically says when it's
We are not bringing that up. We don't want to discuss that at this point. It's not in the task force purview. It's voluntary. So yes, sir.
So I think one of the things moving forward on this is to be able to prioritize which properties. Let's assume no matter how much money there is, there's going to be greater demand for money than there is money. So you need to prioritize. And I think there needs to be a way of prioritizing based on the actual flood risk to a property. So somebody who's in a 500-year flood zone but experienced a flood in Irene, let's say, might be at a lower priority than somebody who's in a floodway right next to the stream.
There's a caveat to that too. We had an issue with a property owner who was not in the floodplain, but their bank was eroding so badly that their leach field was exposed. So we had to have an engineer go in and basically assess the situation and say that the house would be uninhabitable within a year. And they did so, and we were able to get that person a buyout through FEMA. So there are other avenues, even if you're not in the floodplain. So.
Yeah, and it's also particularly a concern in disadvantaged communities in environmental justice areas. So again, we often want to make sure that we're being inclusive in our thought of the type of properties and the type of situations and the barriers that may be preventing these property owners from moving to a higher, safer location.
Anything else? Okay. Erosion in tributaries. Everybody sees it. Really, not a whole lot's being done about it. I apologize. The soil conservation districts are doing the best that they can with the resources they have available. But sediment, erosion happens, sediments come downstream, they end up in the main channels. You guys have all seen it if you live near the Mohawk or the Oswego River Basin in the canal itself. We're dredging constantly, trying to get those materials out of there. It changes the capacity, the carrying capacity of the canal. It changes the navigation, recreation, water quality. Anything you can do on the river is changed by sedimentation. Oh, sorry. Basin-wide groups to look at sedimentation. We had some very good discussions earlier today about how do we identify these areas. Where's the worst offender? On the right-hand side, you can see this is an area on the Mohawk River downstream from Utica. On the right, you can see a stream coming in, or what's left of a stream coming in, and the islands downstream of it where it comes into the canal. That stream's coming out of the Adirondacks. Nothing the stream did, but there's a lot of sedimentation coming in there. When it comes down from a high velocity stream, hits the canal, which is a lower velocity stream on purpose, all the sediment drops out. How do we keep this from happening? How do we do this? And it's through groups, including the soil conservation districts in these areas, and getting more citizen involved in groups and DEC and canals and everyone else, a bigger group that has more power and has the ear of more people to get these discussions going. Barriers, there are quite a few barriers. To find a lead agency, who's going to do it? Who's going to be responsible for leading this effort? Resource availability, again, it's a problem. We want people to serve, we want the citizens to be involved. People can't be involved in everything, especially on a voluntary basis. And the basin size are huge. We're talking 3,000 miles in the Mohawk, over 5,000 square miles in the Oswego Basin. Breaking them down into digestible portions might be the easiest way to do it, where they cross county lines to get groups together from interested stakeholders from both sides. Estimated cost, these are kind of shots. $100,000 to get it up and running. How do you get it developed? Get the lead agency out there, get the lead agency running this and get everything started. Who should be involved? Breaking the basins down if necessary, and how just get the initial program set up. We have an estimated cost of about $250,000 per every 50 miles of stream study. There are thousands of miles of stream in both these basins. So prioritizing is with the flood layouts, with everything else, prioritize where is the most sediment coming from. Some of it is just natural erosion. Some of it is agricultural fields. Some of it is development. All different areas, and prioritizing where most of the sediment is coming from, so that the streams stay healthier than they are right now. Any questions on this portion? Okay, the National Flood Insurance Program. It's a great program, but New York State could provide more support to this effort. They have a cooperating technical partnership and other programs that we could be using better. DEC is a cooperating technical partner. They don't have the resources to do everything that's available. There are programs that DEC or another lead agency or cooperating technical partner could actually lead new flood studies. Correct, Tom? We could be leading some of the flood studies.
Yeah, you can help me out, sure.
We could be directing where some of these flood studies go. The Community Assistance Program, State Support Service Element, the cooperating technical partners, both of those are available to us. No one right now has the resources to use them. Like I said, most of the people in this room are wearing multiple hats, so it's very difficult to get new things on people's plates.
So on the Community Assistance Program, that is a grant program that goes to every state in the nation. But it's a little bit of money spread over a lot of states. So DEC does use that money and actually over supports it. They put in more state resources than the fund requires. In spite of that, they have a statewide staff equivalent of about 7 people responsible for 1,500 communities in the state of New York. And as a result of that, the type of technical assistance that is required, particularly in smaller communities that don't have their own expertise, is just not available. So getting a couple of extra staff people in that office would go a long way. Which is my old office, but I don't
Not to knock them.
But as Bill mentioned, that's a potential barrier. There just aren't the people available to do the work right now. We think this is an important program. That's why the cost is $2 million a year. It needs several more staff members on a full-time basis to get this done. Like you said, 7 people for all of New York State. Think about how many rivers, streams, how many communities that you're dealing with and working with and trying to support. You can't support everybody. It's prioritization, and the big people get supported much faster because of the number of issues they have. Any questions on this one? Okay. Development and infill continue to happen. Properties are being sold constantly. Look at any of them. I've gone through Zillow a couple of times just messing around and finding properties that are for sale right next to the Mohawk River. It says you can build a beautiful 3-bedroom house. Right. You shouldn't. You could. There was, Yeah, there was a couple of properties on Cross Lake that were 95 acres. I would say roughly 40 of that was usable and outside of the floodplain, but it was a 95 acre, perfect for development. Okay, but that's not what we really need to see. This is what we've been discussing, developing state level outreach to assist municipal governments in reducing that amount of development. We're talking about buying out homes in the floodplain. Let's stop them from occurring. Let's stop new ones from happening. That's the big question. The other big thing that we need to do is, are the regulations in place that we need to stop those developments from happening? Obviously not, because they're advertised. People are still building. As canals, we have things called some subdivisions that we are not happy with, but they occurred before us and they're grandfathered in. There's not much we can do about them, but we'd like to, like to take care of them. We're not letting it occur anymore. That's to make sure that it doesn't happen, doesn't get any worse. That's what we'd like all the communities along all these basins to do is, let's stop. We know we've got a problem. Let's stop building and causing more of the problem. Barrier, who's the lead agency? Who's going to take charge of it? I think Tom should, but I think we've gotten to the point that DEC can only do so much. Who can take the lead on something like this? Is it an outside agency that DEC hires or someone hires to come in and do this work? We don't at this point. That's open for discussion. That's how much funding is going to be.
Well, I would just say, I mean, one of the challenges that we have is, New York is a home rule state. So local decision, land use is made at a local decision. Right. So unless and until folks at the local level understand what those risks are about developing in sensitive areas, special flood hazard areas, if you don't know, then you don't know. But if you do know and you still allow, then I think there's some responsibility that needs to be borne on those folks that are making those decisions and potentially putting people in harm's way.
And a lot of times those folks are volunteers. I mean, it was mentioned earlier about local planning boards. I'm on my planning board in a small town that borders Oneida Lake up in the northeast corner towards Sylvan Beach. And, we have no resources. Our code enforcement officer is doing the best that he can, but he's got limited time to commit to our situation. And his knowledge base is much more focused on the building code and, dealing with the day-to-day issues of his job. So we need to somehow make sure that boards like my board have got support and have information, model zoning provisions that they might consider when they're talking to their town board about, hey, we need to update the zoning law, and here are some things that maybe we could do that would help in the long run. We're not going to change anybody's situation today, but it'd be better for everybody long term if we made a few corrections. Well, the lay people that are involved in many of these boards, they don't have the expertise to just kind of pull this stuff out of the ether, they need help. And so I think that this is another area that we can, for a relatively small investment, we could make some really big long-term progress.
Oh, sorry. They're relying on the paid staff, which is code enforcers and the engineers. Mm-hmm. And so they all need to be involved.
They all need to be involved. Right. Yeah, I'm not excluding anybody, but I'm recognizing the reality. Those code enforcement folks, this isn't their focus. Just isn't. They're dealing with those building permits every day. I don't know how it is in your towns, but I know in my town, the town board wants to report on how many building permits were issued and, yada, yada, yada. That's their focus. It really is. I'm not saying they ignore this, but this isn't really where their expertise or their focus is.
And I apologize, this is my mistake. The carryover on some of the potential barriers and the estimated cost. The cost is actually very low for this. Developing a standard, not a standard, but a recommended code language, things like that are fairly simple to do. DEC does some of them. They're provided with. The state has them. That stuff is available out there. Again, education. I did mention it earlier. A lot of the recommendations overlap. They make, in and of themselves, they can stand alone. But when you put them together and layer them together, sometimes the costs go down, but the benefits definitely go much higher. This is another thing that is part of the education process. As you mentioned, home rule is a difficulty. Any municipality can do whatever they want. But to let them know what their risks are in doing that is huge.
Right, exactly, the awareness piece, not only of the officials involved with the blended programs, but generally the populace more broadly, helps to reinforce that, helps to support the boards, it helps deepen that understanding broadly. So that wide, conversation is important to have.
Any questions?
In the end, it improves the community. In the end, it improves the community for all of us.
It does.
It does.
If we make this happen.
Definitely. And folks like you that are involved in your own lake associations or whatever you're involved in, think about planning boards. You guys have experience with what some of the problems are. At least go to some of the planning board meetings and let those folks know what you're thinking or what the problems are.
And planning boards are an administrative board. They're not a judicial board. And what I mean by that is a planning board or a code enforcement officer can only enforce or apply whatever the code or the zoning law or the land use development program is in any specific town. And so planning boards have limited authority and code enforcement officers have limiting authority. If it's not in the code in the first place, then they have little or no real authority to impose a restriction. So that's why, this sort of education and these tools that communities can use to improve their codes is really important.
This one, I apologize, we call out the DOT a little bit on this one because it was low hanging fruit. But there has been a lack of communication between the agencies on development of models, of sharing this information. I know when I started here at Canals, we didn't share information. We've started that discussion. It's just starting. It's by no means mature.
Every day it gets better.
But we're trying. Things like this task force have gotten us together and gotten a lot of people in the same room to have the discussions that, hey, I need that. If I had access to that, it would be helpful to me. Those kind of things don't generally happen because different departments and different corporations do things differently and they don't share as much and they're afraid of liability. Trying to overcome that is difficult, but this is one of the things that we see is, DOT does hydraulic studies at bridges. And they do it quite a lot. Every time they replace a bridge, they're looking to replace a bridge. And they do a model that tells us if it improves or if it decreases the 100-year flood elevation, increases the 100-year flood elevation, whatever it does. But it's not common practice to be shared. And like I said, this is calling DOT out unfairly, but this is one of the studies that we know is out there. They're currently working on an agreement, memorandum of understanding with FEMA to share with FEMA these studies with FEMA if they increase or decrease flood elevations, I believe 1 foot, somewhere in that range. So that's a study that normally DEC canals, if it's on the canal route, would not generally see. That they've done a lot of work and it's very helpful if we could put that new bridge model portion into our model to see how it impacts the whole system. So like I said, calling out DOT, but that's unfair because we're talking about sharing through all state agencies. It's not happening as much as it should. We're trying to reduce that.
I was just gonna say, sort of to take it the next step further, whether it's DOT or if you're improving or reducing flooding, there's a process that FEMA has through a letter of map revision, so that if there are areas that through infrastructure improvement, you're reducing flooding, you go through that process, you actually can take people out of the floodplain. Well, those people that were in the floodplain before and now are out, no longer have to pay flood insurance. So through this sort of process, which I think is what you're getting at, Ken, is better communication, and that information then leads to an actual change so that the people around that infrastructure are benefited by it and benefited in a way that they no longer have to pay flood insurance. That's a win-win situation, right? So I think that's the kind of, that's what you're getting at. So it would affect individual people, in their pocket and save them money through that process. So I think that process can be improved. I would agree. And it's not just, you know, and again, James, not to point out DOT, it's just in general, that it's a good thing to do.
Well, and I'll call ourselves out. How long did it take us to get through?
Oh, well.
You know, that happens.
It's just
Yeah.
leave it.
And we have to get approvals to give to other groups. We're trying to reduce those barriers. We're trying to get that down. There's been a lot of work spent on some modeling, and to not share it with another agency doesn't make sense. Why should they spend money again? We're trying to cut those barriers down. And I apologize, we're getting very late and have quite a ways to go. I apologize. Adaptive measures for Mohawk Basin specifically. Tom was very involved in the Mohawk River Basin Action Agenda. We're trying to build on this. There's not a ton of information presented as specific to the Mohawk, but we'll go through that here. I apologize. Flood insurance maps, as Tom was talking about, letter of map revision. In 2018, after the 2011 hurricanes, our movable dams were upgraded. They had stronger steel. They can be removed under flows now. So we changed our operating procedure in 2018, where we moved the movable dams from the flow in advance of a storm. If there's 72 hours in advance of a storm of a certain flow, we remove our dams. That reduces flooding throughout the area that is served by these movable dams. So what happened is 45 different flood insurance rate maps could be changed. That takes a lot of people out of the flood zone. They no longer have to pay insurance. This hasn't been done because there hasn't been incentive to do it. We think it should be done no matter what because it would save people of New York a lot of money. Percentage barriers. We did some studies in around the Guy Park Manor area in Amsterdam, taking that, expanding that to the 45 firm panels. It's going to cost about $700,000 to update that. I believe probably in the first 5 years, you'd save that on flood insurance premiums. So is it worth it? Yes, we just have to find the funding to do it and show that there is the benefit to do that. Moving on to the second one, the removable dams. They're kind of a problem. We have to have 72 hours notice to remove those. That's the 72-hour advance warning. And we all know how flood predictability is. 72 hours in advance, it's kind of, it may or may not hit. We may get more storm, we may get less storm. We don't know. But based on those predictions is what we remove when we remove the dams. 24 hours, notice the mariners to get them off the canal so we can open the gates. It takes us 48 hours to open the gates. It's a long time. They're 1900s technology. You can see them on the right here on the top. That's what a removable dam looks like. That's actually got half of it's out. So how do we reduce that? At the bottom picture, that's what's technically known as an Obermeyer dam. It's an inflatable bladder dam. You push a button, the air starts releasing from that bladder dam, and the dam slowly goes down. It goes down over a period of half hour, whatever you set it for. So instead of taking 48 hours, we could take our system out in 5 or 6. That would reduce the amount of time that we have to pull the movable dams and the storm doesn't. It would be much more accurate predictions. So it's very helpful. We wouldn't be wasting all the manpower opening and closing the dams as much as we do now. But again, if you look at the bottom, the cost estimate's huge. There's a lot of movable dams there, and it's going to take time to get to them, and it's a lot of money to get to that point. We're going to look at that cost estimate a little bit finer tooth. Even $300 million sounds like a very large number just to be able to do that. Ice jams, Schenectady area. I think everybody's very well aware of these. It's in this room. How do we reduce the threat? They happen in between locks E7 and E8. E7 being Bishop's Ferry. Right now, for the past 3 seasons, Canal Corporation has had a tugboat on standby that goes up and breaks ice when it's necessary. They've broken up ice and passed over the Bishop Ferry Dam. There's currently a design in place underway right now to put Overmeyer dams on top of Bishop Ferry Dam, so that in advance, once the ice is broken up, if there's a prediction of an ice jam occurring, we can drop those in a short period of time, flush all of the broken ice downstream, put them back up, and it should help avoid ice jams. The icebreaker itself, we had a model done by Clarkson University that predicted an ice jam last year. Due to the ice breaking, it didn't happen. So we're seeing it just from the ice breaking, but we think with the other part of the system, we would actually almost eliminate ice breaking if it's done correctly. Ice jams, I apologize. Ice breaking costs about $500,000 annually on the current contract. The modifications that we're looking at Bishop Ferry are about $28 million. There is a hazard mitigation grant application in for that right now to cover most 90% of the cost. If that comes through, Bishop Ferry should be done in the next 5 years. Any questions?
Didn't the Canal Corporation recently purchase a special piece of equipment for the ice, putting the ice?
The water master was very unique, but unfortunately, due to the location of where it had to operate, we couldn't get safety approval to operate that. It was basically being run right at the crest of the dam to break the ice. That didn't. It was deemed an unsafe situation. We actually use that for some dredging operations right now, but it is not used for ice breaking. Any other questions? Okay. Water storage capacity. We have all the Finger Lakes in the Oswego Basin. We have 4 small reservoirs in the Mohawk Basin. So how do we increase it, and how do we increase flow capacity along the canal itself? Delta Reservoir is the only reservoir that doesn't have a hydroelectric plant operating immediately downstream or other requirements such as domestic water, things like that. So could a Delta Reservoir be operated at a little bit lower level to provide flood storage during the summer operations? That's something to be looked into. The bifurcated section of the canal, I'm sure a lot of you have seen where the canal and the Mohawk River run separate from each other, considered a bifurcated section. During a flood, we generally shut off the section of canal and let the water pass through the Mohawk River. Is there a benefit to opening the canal and opening the locks to allow additional floodwater to pass? Once we get the model developed, we'll be able to see. We'll be able to run that scenario. That's one of the things that we're looking at. And also, I forgot to mention, there also is an HMGP grant application in to do this study. If that comes through, the study will be done in the next 1.5 to 2 years. Yes, Oswego River Basin. The recommended adaptive measures. Obviously, there's going to be more here. Other than the models, this is it. The big one. Formal coordination of water releases. We've talked about it, but how do we do it? Develop the model so that we have something to base it on. Like they said, we need something that people believe, something that people can rely on to start it. A permanent standing group to coordinate communication and water releases for high flow events. Very interesting way of saying, get all the water managers in the same room, get DEC, get dishes, get Canal Corporation, get everybody in the same room to make decisions on these releases and have a high flow plan in place. That means looking at and considering the rule curves. They've been around for a long time. Do they still serve the best benefit of all of the people? Having those discussions. What form does this group take? Is it a standing committee? Does it go all the way to a regulating district? Could be. It depends on what people want to do and what people think. How willing people are to come to the table and have that discussion. Whether it has to be mandated or it can be a voluntary. We've seen voluntary, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but it definitely something needs to be done to take care of these releases and to have more discussion. As you can see in the potential barrier, it's very wordy, but there's all kinds of different interests, as you all know. Is it domestic water? Is it recreation? Is it navigation? All different kinds of groups. Every Finger Lake is regulated for a different purpose, basically. And each person, each group has to figure out what the best is for everyone. And whether that's mandated by the state to have that discussion, or if it's voluntary, is something that needs to be said.
With home rule, can it be mandated?
As far as like establishing a
As
district,
far as getting all the water managers together?
well, it can be, as Ken mentioned, it can be done through a different, you would need legend. Well, I'd have to check, but one of the things, you know, we have regulating districts in other parts of the state, and that's formulated through legislation.
I think one of the important things to keep in mind here is even if we can get this, if we can get this trusted modeling, basic information, there's nothing that stops us from asking people to get together and talk about the issue. At least that's a start. And I think that's where we would hope to be in the next year or two, in the short term. In the long term, you're right, there's a much bigger question. Should this be driven by some group that has legal authority to say to one of the controlling entities in the watershed, shut your water off or open it up and let more water pass? You know, that's a bigger question. You know, there's a lot of different perspectives on that, and it's much more complicated than maybe the baby steps we can take to get started. And maybe the baby steps are what create the trust and the communication network that will allow bigger steps later on. Follow me? I think everybody is a little skeptical at the start, certainly about, oh boy, they're going to tell me what I can do. No, I don't want that, you know? So, but we got to start someplace, you know, to do what's best for the group as a whole.
Cross Lake, Seneca River, that section between, you know, Cuga and Baldwinsville, get a rule curve, because currently there's not one. I noticed the rest of the lakes and bodies of water have a rule curve that they follow, but there's nothing for that section downstream of CS1.
It's very difficult to have a rule curve because you have so little storage and so little capacity to put water anywhere, that the amount of water coming in just from the Clyde River makes it very, very difficult to control. I don't want to say it's a natural stream, I get yelled at for that before, but it's less controlled than the Finger Lakes, and that is the problem. We do not have the amount of storage capacity there that you would generally have for a rule curve. Am I ruling it out? It's open for discussion. If there's a water regulating district or something like that, that's going to be part of the discussion on how that area is operated as well. And that'll go to the other recommendations that are going to be coming up.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. Thank you, everybody, for staying. This is the question I think you're getting at. The low gradient between E20 upstream of E24. There's very little fall from the base of CS1 to crest of E24 Baldwinsville. So how do we change it? Okay, take that model again. Estimate the potential benefit to modifying the dam, whether it's lowering the dam and using overmires on top of it to keep your summer pool and dropping it so that you can do it past flood flows. How that happens, look at different options. We're not locked into one option. We're saying, look at everything. What's on the board? What can be done? That is the biggest option we've got right now for that area, besides controlling what water comes into it. How do we get water out of it? Those are the two main issues we've got. Water's coming in from uncontrolled sources and from sources that aren't communicating with each other and not working with each other. Water, how do we get it out? We open up the Tater Gate at Baldwinsville all the way. That's the limit that we can push stuff out. We have to wait for it to come up to the crest and go over the crest in order to push more water out. If we lower that crest somehow artificially during certain times of the year, can we get more capacity through there? We think so. It has to be modeled. We want to make sure that we're not impacting downstream. And that's a couple of things, potential barriers. The resource availability, that's kind of there, kind of not. If we get the model, we should be able to look at Baldwinsville as well. Other potential modifications that would be necessary. Anybody that's worked at Baldwinsville knows that when the flow at Baldwinsville goes up, so does the tailwater. That means Lock 01 in Phoenix is kind of a choke point if we start putting more water through Baldwinsville. So if we can have more capacity in Baldwinsville, we'll have the same capacity coming out of Oneida Lake at Codnoid Dam. Can Lock 01 and 02 handle that capacity? Would that require modifications? That would be part of the discussion, but if we have a model that shows everything, we can figure that out. It takes less time to do that. But this is probably our best way of controlling water out and figuring out how to get more flow out of that reach is through Baldwinsville Dam and somehow do it. I wish we had a good number down here. We're saying 750,000 for the study and to come up with some early prints, early engineering documents on how to do it. Baldwinsville is a masonry dam. It's not like Fisher Ferry or someplace or at our movable dams where we have a concrete sill that we can bolt into. Unfortunately, it's not there. It would take reconstructing part of the dam. It's okay, we'll look at that because, like we said, we're not looking at the benefit cost analysis for this. We're looking at solutions and presenting them as and what their cost is, not necessarily the dollar benefit. Anybody questions on this? No, go ahead.
I mean, you speak of low gradient, but that's not natural. Back in the 1800s, James Gaddis warned of this, that when you lower the gradient up when you dug the Montezuma out, the canal there, where it comes in the Clyde and comes down the river, 1800s, James Gaddis, engineer, and warned of this happening, that you're going to have backups, you're not going to have this and be able to do it all. Am I wrong in saying that?
I have not read Mr. Gaddis' stuff. I don't. I apologize.
Does anyone else on the task force have perspective on historic gradient change?
I'd love to send it to you guys.
Yeah.
I would like to read it.
I
But
mean,
yeah,
I spent hundreds of hours.
we're tasked with trying to find a solution for what's going on right now.
Yeah, we're kind of stuck with where we are,
Yeah,
aren't we?
I mean,
Regardless of what was said.
To say that the gradient is natural, I don't think is accurate. I mean,
Oh, no, I'm not saying that there's a dam there. It's not natural.
But the low gradient change, I guess I should say.
That I don't know.
I can say.
Please do. I would like to read it. Any additional questions? Correct?
Ken, what about the Army Corps engineer study that happened after the 1999 problem?
Yes.
400 pages said do something about that dam. Well, it's 24 years later. Let's talk more action.
And that's, I don't know how to put this. We actually had that discussion early on is, okay, is this task force just another way of placating and not moving things forward?
We read that study and we also realized that the cost estimates they gave back then probably doubled.
Oh yeah, it's 24 years ago.
Right. So.
I mean, that's obvious.
But it was.
We got a lot of brain power here.
Right.
Something needs to happen.
It was a sound recommendation and we all identified that.
Yeah, I think we all kind of came around.
Yeah, I mean, there's no disagreement in this regard.
But it's 24 years. Clearly, there's some disagreement if nothing has happened or nothing has changed.
Yeah, I mean, I think, John, thank you for that. I think we're all feeling that sense of urgency and no one as much as you that's actually experiencing it.
I don't think anybody here, unless they live right where we live, has experienced the sense of urgency. Pretty sure everybody here doesn't live where we live in that section between CS1 and Baldwinsville Dam E24.
Yeah, I mean, I think
You
this-
come out
this
the next
has to
time
be
it's
the
lunch,
action. I
Rebecca.
would like to, yeah.
You come out.
Yeah, I'd like to come see what you're experiencing, but I don't, I'm not trying to diminish it at all. I think this.
Does
this
anybody here
finally
live on that
taking
section?
action.
Seriously.
I do not.
Right, we do.
I own property, I own about 1,000 for the frontage on the Seneca River west of.
I know.
Okay, and since we purchased that property in the mid-80s, we lost 10 physical feet of water. Our house isn't there, but I get what you're saying. That's why I've been with this for 42 years.
I know.
And I can tell you, for the 42 years that I've been involved in all the studies and the meetings, this here is the most encouraging presentation that I've experienced.
I get
And
it.
we have a group of people here, we've never had this before. We've never had a group that's been organized to address this issue. Never, not the 40, well, even before, if you read the records and stuff. No, I'm very encouraged by everything you folks are saying and everything you're presenting up here tonight. I hope everyone else will support it because we're going to need politicians supporting us.
Yeah, I think the support will need to come beyond obviously this room, but
Right.
you know, your points are well taken. There is nobody sitting up here that doesn't appreciate what you're saying.
Come out next time it floods.
I just want to interject one point here that's different now than 24 years ago. And that is, people are starting to realize climate change and take a little bit more urgency. And there wasn't talk about that. Okay, they are different times. And you know, we're in the state, I've been in several agencies looking at resiliency, adaptivity, and so it is being taken, a more serious look is being taken right now in that context.
Sorry, that's a pressure point for us.
I understand.
That's an incredibly sensitive pressure point. We feel that we're not being listened to enough. Like I said, if that study was done 24 years ago, something got done then, might have been a lot less damage and a lot less hassle now to move forward.
Let's talk about a plan, you know, taking
Yeah, let's move
it,
forward.
obviously going from the study, but what goes with that? You know, who's the target, you know, members of the legislature? What's the right tactic by which to reach them? How do we hold each other accountable? And by that, I mean, how do you continue to hold us accountable to make sure that action is being taken and it's being progressed? You know, it will be even once there's funding identified, it'll be a multi-year project to do the engineering, design, permitting. So we really need to stay focused so that that doesn't stretch out to a decade.
The thing everybody should be encouraged by, I know I am, is that through the Bond Act, something we have now that you didn't have 24 years ago is funding. This is your vehicle to get to that funding. So I know you've waited a long time, and I know I can't imagine how frustrating it is, but I'm sure it is. But you have a vehicle now that's going to get you to that point. So it's just going to take a little bit more patience to make this happen.
So on that point, will there be something in the final report that gives us an idea of the key things that we can do with our community groups and with individuals to support specific recommendations you're making, right? Because that's why we're here, is because we want to give whatever active support we can. And we are not knowledgeable about what activities that we can undertake that might have the best chance of supporting the initiatives you're recommending that have the best chance. So if some part of your report says for organizations, local communities, here's the things that you should do as part of our recommendations, that's what we'll be interested in seeing, right? How can we be a part of moving those initiatives forward? Because we know it's not just publish the report and you're good. We understand there's more to it than that.
No, and we don't want to end, we don't want our involvement or our drive to end with the report.
That's right.
We don't, it's not an endpoint for us. Like Rebecca said, it's not a static document. We want to keep things moving forward. And
yeah, so
it's-
how do
it's
we
a-
start participating at that point?
Exactly,
right?
and I think in the next steps portion of the report is how do we move forward? How do we get it off where we are right now? Ma'am, you had a question?
Yeah, is there anything to prioritize this over other areas that, and we've already done a study on Corps of Engineers that can't be used? I'm surprised that recommendation was a study. I would have hoped that it would have been more cost estimates, what needs to be done, because we've had studies.
Understood. And then the study is only because, first off, the age. 24 years is way too long for anything, and it should have been done. Don't get me wrong. Take the new model so that we can make sure that, like I said, Oswego, on the Oswego Canal, 01 and 02, make sure that we're not damaging downstream, just making sure that the impacts aren't there to mess things up downstream. I don't see this as a long study. I think it's a pretty simple study. It's going to be the engineering that's going to take the amount of time. And to let you guys know, we are watching. We were told behind closed doors that there could be a FEMA HMGP grant opportunity coming up. in the next few months. If it comes up, we're going to look to put this in. We're going to try and get funding any way we can, but we're going to we're going to write up what this is and try and get it into the funding process, however means possible. We are trying to prioritize this and the model as part of the first efforts to come out of this.
You know, as a quasi-volunteer group on the task force here, you know, and to the Canal Corporation's credit, you know, nobody knows what the cost of rebuilding this structure would be because we haven't done any recent investigation into what's there to start with. I mean, I'm talking physically now. You mentioned a masonry structure. I'm not to get into engineering here, but you know, but seriously, it makes a difference. Masonry structures like you have in an old stone farmhouse basement, you know, where the stones all piled on top of each other, a little bit of mortar or some small rocks chinked in. I mean, that's kind of stone construction. Concrete is a whole different structural entity. Well, you put one thing on top of an old stone foundation, that's one thing. You put something different maybe on a concrete foundation, or maybe the stone foundation won't support it. You follow me? Maybe it won't carry the loads. I don't mean to get into a lot of detailed baloney here, but this has got to be, it's got to be reviewed, and somebody's got to put pencil to paper and come up with something a lot more sophisticated as it relates to a technical answer than we're really in a position to do here.
But on a local level, somebody asked, what could you do? Well, you did. Start thinking about what coalitions you have, what community leaders you have, start working on your letters of support now. Because every grant application through FEMA, whether it's HMGP or whatever, will sometimes ask for letters of support from local communities, local stakeholders. So get those ready because we're going to need them. You know, whoever the applicant is, whether it's Canal Corps or whoever is going to need those letters of support to show that there's a local constituency that is really impacted by this and wants to see this happen.
And maybe even this report. I mean, if after you see it, you look at it, you think it's credible, you think it's something that could make a difference, it doesn't hurt at all for your association or your group to let your elected state representatives know, hey, listen, you know, we appreciate that somebody's taking and spending some time and attention on this. Even though efforts have been made 20 or 30 years ago, nothing came of those. We don't want to see that happen here. We want to see something come from it. So, you know, just speaking as an individual now, not on behalf of anybody but myself, we all know that that's what makes things happen, is having the appropriate political support to come up with the resources so that, like the Canal Corporation and DEC and DOT and the entities that sometimes kind of get a bad rap, you know, they're really trying to do the right thing. I mean, they're not going to work every day saying, well, let's see how we can screw things up here. You know, they really aren't doing that. And so if we get them the resources, you know, people of goodwill are going to do the right thing.
And that core study won't be wasted. It'll be referenced in the grant application, and it'll lend support and weight and scoring potential to the grant application. So, you know, as much as we're disheartened that it was done 24 years ago and a recommendation was never followed, it can still be put to use currently.
Any other questions or comments on this one? Okay, something we talked about before, natural wetlands and floodplain restoration. Upstream of Cross Lake, up by Montezuma, there is a lot of floodplain that's disconnected. By one way or another, it's not there. A lot of it's being farmed as agriculture right now. And how do we get back to that? I think I showed this one before. Tom and I have both talked about this a lot. We think this is we're kind of excited about this as well. How do we get this property? How do we acquire this property so that we can restore the disconnected floodplain? This is the wetlands in between Montezuma Wildlife Management Area and Montezuma National Wildlife Refuge. It's the missing piece. So not only is it valuable for flood storage and for restoring to wetlands, but it's also restoring the wetlands that connects those two areas together. This is a very valuable ecological piece to the puzzle, not to mention flood storage, groundwater recharge, water quality improvements.
I was just going to say, we don't see these opportunities very often in the world that I work in. So to see something like that as an opportunity, One of the things that would be good to do is to run, look at the hydraulic, the HEC-RAS model for that particular section. I think is a detailed study to see what the benefits of restoring that back, what impacts, beneficial impacts it would have on Cross Lake in lowering or reducing the water surface elevations, base flood elevations further downstream. That would be really interesting to see exactly what benefit that would do. I mean, right now, that farm field is burned up, it's disconnected, it can't flood into that area. So if you could reconnect 1,200 acres of floodplain, I suspect, but again, we'd have to run that analysis. I suspect that would have some beneficial impact to folks further downstream. And it's just looking at there. I'm sure there's other areas as well. That was just sort of the first sort of cut, as they say, the first analysis. But again, I suspect there are other areas as well. But again, it's somebody owns that property. Somebody is actively farming that property. Whether or not they'd be interested in selling that property. Those are the other questions that then go along with it. But as a possible, mitigation measure, those types of projects are like, the Willy Wonka golden ticket, to get into the chocolate factory kind of thing.
Yeah, normally 100 acres is a big restoration project.
1,200 acres, I mean, oh my
We're talking over
gosh.
1,000 acres, it's a very.
So if hypothetically we did that project, that would more than likely increase the retention value along the shoreline of the Seneca River.
That would
East of that.
that would likely have, again, we'd have to run the quick analysis to show that, but that would likely have benefits further downstream.
And though we're showing this and we're talking about 1,200 acres, we also want to look at the entire Clyde River system.
Yeah.
There is no storage on the Clyde River itself. There's got to be other disconnected areas if we can purchase them or get access to them. Canals on some of them, we'll see what we can do as well. So this is the quote low hanging fruit if they want to sell. But
it could help, but nobody's saying it's a silver bullet.
No,
I mean, this
no.
doesn't solve.
Yes, but adding these things up hopefully will prevent a substantial gain downstream. Any questions on this? This is something that isn't going to help your flooding, but it will help the education and other things. Digital mapping is available in a number of locations and a number of counties on FEMA's website in the Oswego Basin. We've done some digging. Some of the digital mapping is backed up by 25-year-old studies or older.
Or more.
It's quite substantially older. So all they did was digitize the old study and put it on a map. So it really hasn't improved. No climate change is accounted for, and a lot of the development isn't accounted for. The models all need to be updated, even the ones that you see. The lower right that you see, that's a digitized version. That's not an updated map. That's not an updated study. That's just a digitized version of the original study. So how do we do that? If you look at the bottom, the total cost for updating all of the counties in this basin is about $13.6 million. But how are people going to know if they're in the floodplain or not in the floodplain before they buy a house or develop a property if we don't have accurate models? Like we said from the beginning, accurate models are the basis for everything we're trying to do. Same thing for your flood areas. How do you know what it is unless you have an accurate model that's current? FEMA, to their credit, updates as much as they can, but there's only so much money to go around. There's only so many people to go around. Getting this included with the cooperating technical partnership, the grants, additional monies into the grants, those kind of things are what were needed. So this is kind of layering on top of what we were talking about earlier, but this is something that definitely needs to be done because education is great, but if you're educating on materials that are outdated or wrong, it doesn't help at all. So any questions here? Something else near and dear to DEC, Resilient New York studies, something they've been doing in the Mohawk Basin. and they're seeing benefits. They take streams and break them down into the community level. And what can a community do to improve their stream? What can they do for sedimentation? What can they do for flood studies? Things like that, and break it down to a smaller section so that people can look at their stream. They just did Chittenango Creek, I believe, was just done. And I was on a couple phone calls where Cazenovia and Chittenango and other communities, okay, what if we did this? Well, okay, let's look at that. And it allowed them, it gave them the information they needed to start looking at how they can improve their own situation. So not necessarily the main stem of the Mohawk, the Oswego, but it could, but all the tributaries and everything else, the sedimentation we talked about, everything else coming down to the main channel of the river, the Finger Lakes, everything else. How do we improve what's coming into that? Improve the water quality, reduce the flooding. All those things are through the Resilient New York studies. And basically take what they've done and then what they've gotten success from and expand it into our basin. Wasco River, Flint Creek, Clyde River, Gennardwa, and the Seneca Creek main stem. It's about $200,000 per study. They have a consultant come in, they model the entire stream, they check it, they give recommendations on what could be done. They look at different things. Flood banks, what do you?
Flood bank.
Flood benches.
Or
floodplain restoration, flood benches. What impact would that have? How big would it have to be to really impact downtown of the community that it goes through? Things like that, that they're looking for, that they're looking at to empower the communities to go after funding for it, to go out and do it. You've had some great successes with that.
Yeah, we did flood studies back, 2014 in the Mohawk, on 13 tributaries to the Mohawk, and the number of projects that have been implemented that were specifically identified in those studies and have since been implemented is actually extremely encouraging. And to do more of that, we've been doing flood studies through the Resilient New York program across the state since then. But it's not to say that we can't maybe try to fold some of these in to the Resilient New York program. It's just a matter of available funding to do it.
Available funding and getting the direction that this is where the funding is supposed to come.
Yeah, well, somebody needs to tell me that. So somebody tells me to do that, then that's what we do.
Has anybody seen any of these studies? I think they're all online, correct?
They should all be on our webpage.
They're on the DEC website. So if you search for Resilient New York flood mitigation, you should be able to find some of those studies. You can see what they've been doing, what they recommended, and you can start looking into what has been done since those studies were done. And I think that's it. Question and discussion. We're way over time. I apologize. But this is the time. Brian, did you have any?
I don't have questions or comments right now. I think we have some in the chat, and I think Rebecca's going to have to come back in and lead us through there when she gets through there. But we've taken active questions throughout the presentation. Ken, thank you very much. And task force members, it's been great that you've engaged. What do we have here? We can have a further discussion here. I apologize that things have run late, and we had that earlier technical difficulty.
We'll open up any questions anybody has that we didn't discuss, things that you think should be included. This is the time that we'd like to hear it, because we're getting close to the end of finishing your report.
Do we have any questions? You guys have done a great job of getting stuff together.
I think about the
Planning
chat.
how things work.
What's that?
I think the chat was kind of equally bombed, so.
Oh, the chat was bombed too.
We're here to support what you're doing.
It was.
Thank you. That's going to be the biggest input, as they were talking about before, is your support. We're state employees. We can't talk to legislators. That's where you guys come in. If you really want to see this stuff go through, that's the kind of support that you're going to need to.
It keeps telling us what we need to do, to support it.
There's a line we have to be careful of. That's not my specialty. I'll let others discuss that, but yes, we can provide that information. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. My name is John Harmon. I represent the United Lake Association, 2,500 members. And I tell you that because I hope that, hope to enlist our membership, our full membership, to get behind the great work that you're doing. So first of all, I'd like to thank you for all the work that you've done. And we'll do whatever we can on our end to help support you. I just want to remind you as well that, the United Lake Association also represents thousands and thousands of residents, over 100 business, and literally millions and millions of commerce each year through our lake. So we hope, that you keep us in the forefront during your deliberations. 2 nights ago at our board meeting, we passed a resolution that I hope to offer into the record for this particular group. And I don't think it's anything that should be problematic for you. Basically, what we're saying is our biggest concern was we have a rule curve on Oneida Lake. And our biggest concern or threat really is that someone operates this rule curve right to the letter of the law, so to speak. I think it's a great guideline. And in the past, Howard Goebel and then Jeff has assured me that, they follow that with a little bit of a buffer each year, because if it goes down to the rule curve, that's going to be hugely problematic. It's a very shallow lake. The slightest drop, a drop of a foot in level results in probably 30 feet of lost shoreline, and the other way around as well. An increase of a foot, we have people losing 40 and 50 feet in their lawns. So please keep in mind that we'd like to have this rule curve followed, but yet with a buffer in place. And my new best friend Jeff explained to me that that he's been doing that, keeping this buffer in place. So that's important to us because I think a lot of people think that in Labor Day the season's over for Oneida Lake and no one goes on the water, and that is absolutely not true. We have many boaters, fishermen, duck hunters who are out there in September and October. So we appreciate keeping the lake level higher. So we thank you once again for the great work that you've done. I hope to enlist our members into supporting your recommendations, and I'd like to place into the minutes our proposal. So to whom do I give it?
Is it okay to post that on our
Absolutely.
website?
That's over to Karen, John. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Nothing that you have seen here today that is covered is not going to be included in the report. So I've heard a lot of folks that are supportive of these recommendations. So to the extent that you want to communicate that support to your legislators, that's certainly appropriate. But our obligation is to get the report to the governor by the end of the month.
I got a couple more little ones.
No, please.
And this came up in the discussion when I met you weeks ago. The gates at Phoenix that you had mentioned, if something changes in Baldwinsville at E24, can the gates in Phoenix in 01 and 02 handle more flow? You told me the New York State Canal controls 2 gates in Phoenix. There's 6 gates there.
Yes.
The other 4 are controlled by the power generator?
Correct. Jeff?
Yeah, actually, with what transpires at 01 Eagle Creek, they actually are responsible for the water level there. So they actually control all 6 gates. 2 of the gates are owned by the New York State Canal Corporation. That's gates 1 and 2. And those are operated by our staff at direction, usually during the festival.
Same thing at Beeville with Brookfield, correct? Okay. Brookfield generates out of Baldwinsville as well, though. Okay. Why does the New York State Canal not control those gates more? Why are we held hostage by a small generating company? For flow? No, it's in Phoenix.
Phoenix, their capacity, most of it is passed through for generation through the hydro facility. Excess flows, as flows start to come up, are put through the 14er gates in the middle, and then we have those last 2 gates for.
So if more flow came out of Beeville with a corrective measure, hopefully done at Beeville eventually, if more flow came out of Beeville, then Phoenix could handle more.
I'm not sure of the capacity. Depends on how much flow comes out. That would have to be studied.
Ken, also you said Canandaigua Lake got 4 inches of rain, so they released water without telling you. How much water level increase on the lake itself did that 4 inches of rain produce? Does anybody know?
So, yeah, actually, because I manage.
Well, that's right, you're on the west side.
Yeah, so.
Come to my house, Jeff.
What has transpired, you know, in that last.
Just doing this
not
weekend.
what's currently happening now. There's about, 2.5 to 3 inches of rain that fell in a short period of time in a very specific area, south to north, and, focusing on Canandaigua Lake. So that, just that initial rainfall will increase that water surface elevation by 2 to 3 inches. And that's what it increased because at 8:30 p.m., the Canandaigua facility decided to open the feeder gate, and start discharging water. And about 10:30 p.m., they decided to open the other 2 gates, the other 2 outlets. So they were full open by 10:30 p.m., discharging approximately 800 CFS into the 5 river.
Which nobody told the canal.
We received emails.
At
But
10:30
that's-
at 10:30 at night.
But that's the thing, it's the coordination.
Okay, but your lake level comment, it went up a few inches
That's
because of
because-
one big rain event localized to their area.
Yes.
Okay,
But I mean, there's other factors considered, like,
I get
the ground saturation.
yeah, a lot of variables.
Yes.
But when the
yes.
water level goes up where I live, it goes up by feet, not by inches.
Understood. Understood. But that's.
My house is for sale. Does anybody here want to buy it? Because they redrew the floodplain maps, didn't tell me. Thanks, federal. Does anybody know the state bill number of the real estate disclosure? So that we can write a letter or fire an email or phone call, if that's gonna come up?
We'll get that for you, John.
We can definitely get that.
And it's a John's question on the hydro operation. When FERC relicensing occurs, there is a period of public comment. I don't think there's often a lot of public participation at that juncture, but I think that is an opportunity to raise concerns that you have with the impact of a hydro operation on your community.
Yeah, I don't understand why the canal authority can't control how much water gets dumped into their system.
We would love to be able to control how much water
Yeah.
gets dumped into our system.
Probably wouldn't be talking here today, would we?
Right, and I.
Probably not as.
Be a short meeting.
Here
we go, the issue.
John, I just want to give you one clarification. It doesn't make that big of a difference, but at Baldwinsville, it's Brookfield, and then at Phoenix, it is Eagle Creek. It's completely different opera. So while we're trying to coordinate all these different entities, like Brookfield may not really care, but Eagle Creek.
Nobody cares upstream sometimes.
Right, right. But I'm just telling you, like these are the different, and they're not little hydro operators, actually they're big multinationals.
But the areas that they have,
Right.
it's a little Brookfield gen station at
No,
Beeville.
I just wanted
It's
to
a
clarify
small
that.
Eagle generating station at Phoenix.
Right, within their own, like, they're not necessarily coordinated, it's not the same company.
And what the hydro plant generally, like Jeff said, is only interested in their impoundment to make sure they can maximize generation.
Can we do something about the contracts the next time they come up?
We don't have contracts. There are.
Wait, New York State doesn't have a contract on how they make money? Stop.
Hang on. There are hydro easements. We do not, once they're given, they're given.
Wow, non-negotiable for the future at all?
I can't say too much about that. Computer, I think it's still under kill me. We're looking into all of those. The relicensing at Phoenix is almost over. We have anybody that wants to comment, I think you're about past that point on that one. Brookfield and the people that own Seneca, the plant across the river, I believe both of those are exemptions. You would have to write to FERC directly because they don't have to go through relicensing.
And maybe that's something where, we can coordinate with Joelle to find out if a citizen wanted to contact FERC. We could provide some instruction
I can
on how
get
to
you
do
the-
that.
I have all of the license numbers and I can give you the people to contact if that's what you would like to do.
We can share that with the associations as well, so that they can share with their members.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, we have the license numbers, we have all of that information that we can get to anybody that would like to see it. It's all public information.
But those are federal licenses, right?
Correct.
I mean, they're issued by the federal, by FERC. They're not.
Federal Energy Regulatory
Yeah, New York State has no jurisdiction over those licenses whatsoever. Be it Canal Corporation or DEC or
Yeah,
anybody.
we get, like Rebecca said, they get relicensed generally once anywhere from 30 to 50 years. Depending on how much, how many improvements they make to the environment, but 30 years is usually a minimum relicensing. So, but there's nothing that says that you can't submit a letter to FERC voicing concerns, displeasures, whatever. That, like I said, I used to work at a lot of FERC plants, and I've actually worked for both Eagle Creek and Brookfield. We got a lot of those letters, yes. It wasn't uncommon, and they were actually, you have to address them quickly, because if FERC gets a letter from a federal congressman, they want an answer, and you have to provide.
Just another point about that, the power producers, they'll run them against each other. Because that just happened in the Albany area.
Yes.
Before we wrap up, I want to see if the task force members would like to issue any closing comments or any summary or anything like that. This is probably the last time you'll see these folks together in the same room, but we'll be continuing to work with you as we go forward with the report. So anybody, I mean, there's been a lot of engagement here. You've certainly said what you want to say, but if there's anything, any parting words that you'd like to leave the audience with, and us with, otherwise we'll continue to engage. Tom?
I guess I would just say that this is the start. This is the beginning, right?
Yes.
This is the start. So
yeah,
I look at this as there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and so let's roll up our sleeves.
I mean, we
start
right.
working.
This is just, we've done our baseline work here, and now we have to go forward to make sure that we can get these put into place. That's going to be the responsibility of the governor, working with the legislature, working with the state, federal, and local authorities. Yes, Bill.
And you know, just to reiterate, there's no one silver bullet to flooding issues. You know, part of it are controls of the waterways themselves, but part of it is really controls of how we develop our land and how we develop our infrastructure and our buildings.
No, I'm glad that there's such public participation, that it matters, your voices are heard. We do care deeply about what you're going through, and I know it's really generous of you to come out on a Wednesday afternoon when I'm sure you've got, you know, work and family obligations, and that is a big testament to what you're experiencing. And I hope that you're proud, you know, when we enact these recommendations. I hope that, you know, we're successful and that you feel like we're part of something that'll serve generations. So I'm encouraged. I hope you're feeling encouraged, and I know the real work is still ahead. This is, you know, as Tom said, it's the start. It's not the end point, but we're grateful for the feedback that you've given.
What happens to this point forward? Because Director Stratton said that this may be this is probably the last time we see you. So what is the process after today?
Before the reports.
Before the report is due.
Oh, okay.
I mean, we're still actively on duty, and the task force by the law that was passed to create the task force is required to meet annually hereafter. So I was mistaken. Maybe the last time in 2023.
Well, we are required to meet annually. And it also, I mean, this is the last official meeting before the report gets submitted. There's nothing that keeps us from having meetings with your community. When the report's published, if you have a chance to read it and you have questions about it, there will be a full report that'll be over 100 pages long. There will be an executive summary that'll be roughly 40 pages with more graphics. You know, if you want help navigating that, we can meet. You know, Joelle joined us. She was out in the field today and is went back out, and you know, she's local. If you need help with figuring out how to write letters of support, what other avenues do you have, you know, to advocate, navigating your legislative maps to figure out what levers you have at your disposal, Joelle can help walk you through all of that. So, even though it's the fourth meeting required through legislation, it's not the end of engagement. So, you've got our cell phone numbers, reach out to us. We can also plan to do a briefing once the report's published. It might be good to do a webinar without unmute capability, to just walk through the report and what's in it. But, we can also do small group meetings, come to your, association meeting, come to your, wherever you guys are already gathering, if we can meet you there and make it more convenient where people are already coming together, please lean on us to do that. And, we can use the Flood Task Force website that could use, the materials there, it could use some modernization as the measures move forward. We can post updates to that site. We don't have great customer relationship databases to say, hey, it's time to start writing your letters, but if we can work through lead points of contact for the various associations, that's a good way. If you can help us to disseminate messaging at key inflection points when we need letters of support, or if there's a legislative day that's applicable. Those are, there's a lot of opportunities to come back together.
One of the first meetings we had, I think, with the group before the task force got underway was in Cato. That was probably about a year ago. And then the Assemblyman Lamondes, Assemblyman Sturpey, and Senator Mannion were all there. Senator Mannion's district has changed somewhat, but they're all still monitoring. I know Senator May's staff is here too. So they're all still very much interested in the work we are doing and how you perceive that work too. So feel free to reach out to them also. And I want to thank all of you for being here today. I apologize again for our technical problems, which were unforeseen. Mike, thank you very much for recovering that and moving forward. And Ken, thank you very much for that comprehensive presentation. And I want to thank our task force members for their work. And again, we still have a lot more work to do in the 14 days or so that remain before July 1st comes around. And we'll use every hour of that time. We thank you, and we'll make sure we continue to benefit from all of these folks going forward and in our requirements. And I think it is well said that even after the report goes in, we can continue to guide you through that and to make sure that you're not left hanging. So we're doing the work that we want. We want to see this happen, and I think that the information out there with the Bond Act that's now being decided. There are also Bond Act meetings that are taking place in every community. I think Joel went to one recently, but there are others. And so, reach out to DEC. Tom, you may have more information.
Yeah, we have
about that.
a bunch more coming up. Saranac Lake, if you want to get up to the Adirondack.
Hybrid options.
6 more than 2, yeah, 2 virtual options. So if you can't make it to one of the in-person sessions, the virtual sessions will very similar, convey that similar kind of information.
400 million is the total, is that correct?
4 billion.
4 billion, a lot more.
2 billion. And another.
And how much was set aside for property buyout?
250 million.
250 million.
And 1 billion for mitigation.
And you don't have to, you don't have to be, if you go to one of the other regional ones, you don't have to be from that region, right?
No, it's similar across the entire state. So it's a broad, individual presentations will be more specific to some of the disadvantaged communities locally, but all of that information is available.
Yeah, so they're online, they're in person, and it would be an opportunity for you to be able to speak there too. If there are no more questions, no more comments, I think we're done. We will still be here as we continue to break down and to wrap up. And thank you all very, very much. We appreciate it.
Thank you.